We're bringing on the wonderful Miko Peled, big show fave. People love Miko. He is an Israeli-American activist, writer, speaker, and he's the author of The General Son, Journey of an Israeli in Palestine, and also the author of Injustice, The Story of the Holy Land Foundation 5. And we're going to get to talking to Miko about his own personal story, and then we're going to talk to Miko about what's happening right now. Miko, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Good to be with you. Sorry about the delay. Yeah, I just walked in, but good to be with you again. And also now, I run the Palestine House of Freedom in Washington, D.C.
Right. Okay.
To the bio, yeah.
Well, I'll add that, and I'll add a link. So you're running late because you're coming from where?
Well, there was a protest in front of the White House protesting Netanyahu's visit. And so I was there. I'm still in my protest gear. And then I rushed back home to get to see you, to have a chat with you.
Tell us about this protest.
So it was very interesting. I got there a little bit early. It was supposed to start at 6. I got there a few minutes early. And the first thing I saw was a huge crowd of ultra-Orthodox community, really big, like half a block almost, just them. It looked like that was the protest. And of course they carried the signs, and there are a few other people with banners and stuff like that. But that was the first thing I saw. And it was actually heartwarming to see that. And I was actually there with a few other Jewish friends. So it was like the majority of the people that were there when I got there were Jewish, and demonstrably Jewish with that community particularly. But then towards the time that I left, it was, filling up, and more people were coming, and, protesting the fact that the war criminal gets to visit the White House and be treated like, with all these honors as though he was some hero. When there's a warrant for his arrest, he shouldn't be at the White House. He should be arrested and sent to The Hague. And then he should be sent to Palestine to be tried, I think, by Palestinians.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great.
That would be the real justice.
They'd be too nice to him, though.
They probably would, but I think that kind of like the Nuremberg trials, where they would bring the victims and the relatives of victims to testify, or just like the Eichmann trial, where they brought the real victims and the true stories come out that way. And to see them sit in the defendant's chair would be very gratifying. So, but that's not the reality we're in right now. He is a VIP. He met with Elon Musk, and of course now he and his buddy Trump are in the White House. It's really horrifying to think how despicable this reality is right now. Just people dying, and he's being given, all the honors.
I wanted to ask you about Netanyahu, because you have a somewhat unique perspective. I mean, we're going to talk about the politics, but you also happen to have known him personally. Can you explain how your family knows him, and if you have any insights about him?
Well, I don't know that I have insights. I mean, I remember him. His first wife and like high school sweetheart was my sister's best friend, and so he used to come over and we used to see him. And I just remember him coming in. He was an officer in the super duper biggest, most glorified special forces commando unit in the Israeli military. He would come, on the weekends home from, in uniform, and the semi-automatic slung over his shoulder and the red beret. And as a kid, I would look up and it was like God just stepped down from the Olympus. I mean, who doesn't want to be him? The relationship continued. I remember him coming back from a mission here, a mission there, and once he had a flesh wound, and we would sit around and listen to stories, but and all that. His older brother was Yoni Netanyahu, who was killed in Entebbe. So I mean, that was kind of the and so it was like, wow. And he and my sister and his wife were still friends even after they broke up, so there was still that connection. But then once he got into politics, then that was it. It was obvious the guy is just a right wing. Just the worst type of right-wing Zionist that you could possibly imagine, and that was it. Everything ended right there and then. Or a relationship of a kid looking up to an idol and then realizing, I think the problem is Americans still look at him like I looked at him when I was 5.
Right.
And people need to grow up and realize, it may have looked glorious in the eyes of a 5-year-old, but really the guy is a criminal and needs to go to jail.
And can you talk about, you wrote this excellent book that I highly recommend, The General Son. You and your family experienced a real tragedy, and Netanyahu tried to kind of exploit that. What happened to your family and how he responded, and then how your sister responded?
Yeah, so it was September 1997, and there was a suicide attack in Jerusalem, downtown Jerusalem, and my sister's little girl was there, Smadar. She was just 12 years old. And she was killed, and he was prime minister at the time, so it was this awkward moment where he called as a friend, also as the prime minister. You know, because typically the prime minister comes to visit anyway, so that's kind of a thing. Plus, he was an old friend, so there was a sense that, oh my God, this terrible thing happened. But she told him not to come, that he wouldn't be welcome there. And so that was the story, and that was it, and he never came. It was interesting because later on in his political career, he bragged that during his first term as prime minister, things were going well, and there was prosperity and peace, and there was not a lot of violence. And so my sister reminded him that it's not exactly true. It was true for our, and there was a lot of violence. Actually, there was a great deal of violence during those years. This is kind of after the disillusionment with Oslo, so like the mid to late 90s, and then leading up to the second Intifada. So these were not good years by any stretch of the imagination. And of course, he was the prime minister.
And why did she tell him don't come?
Because she and her husband felt that their daughter the responsibility for their daughter's death was the Israeli government, was the state of Israel, not the Palestinians. And so there was no room for him to come because he could have prevented it had he been interested in peace, had he been interested in human rights, the rights of Palestinians, the ending of the violence and so forth, he could have done it. He was in power. And his mandate was to do precisely the opposite, to make sure that there is no peace, that there is no continuation of the Oslo process, which we all know today was not really a peace process, but there was, in those days, we thought it was. And they said very clearly the responsibility for her death and to the death of countless Palestinians is the Israeli government. So we don't want him in our house. And it was interesting because other members of government did come, and it was very, very awkward, because as a family, we knew that they were responsible. We knew that they had the chance, the opportunity, the power to change things, and they didn't because what they wanted to do. So it was a very, very kind of a tense situation.
Wow. Yeah. By the way, someone just wrote in the comments, I read Peled's book, The General's Son, bought 2 copies and donated 1 to the library.
Thank you.
Yeah. It is really great, and it had a big impact on me, by the way, also.
Thank you.
And it tells the story, it has 2 parts. One is about your father and one is about you, and it's your father's evolution on Israel Palestine, and then your evolution on it, which was, it sparked in large part by what happened to your niece.
Mine did, yeah. My father had died 2 years before that.
Yours, yeah.
And that's what got me to get engaged. That's what pushed me to get engaged. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I often say, it's really sad, but I often say, we go through, we are open to big changes in our way of thinking and in our, in our deep belief in things. So usually as a result of something terrible. And that's kind of the tragedy of the human experience. That's usually what drives us to look deep and question the truths and the things that we believe in.
Right. It is interesting, though, that for a lot of people, when something like that happens, they lose empathy for others, right? Like that can turn people, radicalize them in a totally racist, way, right? They start dehumanizing other people. And your experience was the opposite. It kind of, it made you open your eyes to why these young men would have done something like that.
Right. I think we're so used to violence that we never stop to actually slow down and just think of a single act of violence and what prompted it. And when you think about 3 young men going to kill themselves and kill other people along, it's a horrible thing. And we have to figure out how we got to the place where such a terrible thing happens. And what was it that brought that reality upon these people? And that's when you ask that question, then I don't know how you can reach any other conclusion other than we need to reach out and stop it. It has nothing to do with religion or nationality or anything like that. It has to do with something much deeper.